Hello, I'm Jill Want, Chair of the London PM Forum Committee, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our webinar on CRM. CRM systems are arguably the lifeblood of our business development and marketing. They enable us to have more information and data on how to manage and improve the relationships we have with our customers and prospects. So amongst other things, they shine a light on who our clients and prospects are, what and when they buy from us, what our pipeline and sales performance looks like, and importantly, where are the gaps and opportunities that we can pursue to make more sales. So in my role, advising on European bids, our CRM system helps me to have a view on our clients, on how our clients interact with us across countries, as well as different services. So when a new bid comes in, it's essential for me to be able to understand who already works with that client across the globe. This enables us to speak with our wider team and often unearth some fantastic experience and knowledge about the client that gives us a much stronger story to tell. Of course, bids are nearly always time pressured, so being able to use the CRM gives us invaluable information and connections at speed. Many of us only get to see the CRM systems in the firms that we work for. So today we are lucky to have two very experienced business development and marketing minds, bringing an in-depth and agnostic view of the CRM market. Michael Warren of Wilson Allen and Susie Pugsley of PSBD. Michael Warren is Vice President of Wilson Allen's CRM practice. He has dedicated his career to helping professional services firms implement CRM. He helps firms to identify the critical success factors for their CRM and then implement simple, practical and realistic measures to achieve them. So I'm looking forward to hearing what he's got to say. And Susie Pugsley has over 23 years experience in advising and delivering in all areas of BD strategy, including CRM, account management, events, coaching and training. And in particular, she has worked with CRM systems both in-house and as a consultant. So selecting and implementing the right CRM systems for each organisation's needs and selling them into boards. So in this webinar, we discuss how firms can bridge the gap and move from knowing that investing more time and resource in CRM technology is key and taking action and strengthening the position of your firm.
Great, thanks Jill, and nice to virtually meet you all. I'm excited because today is the first day I've put on a jacket for 8 weeks, just to celebrate the occasion. The agenda we're going to go through today is, as Jill said, an in-house and an external view of what CRM is, and then talking about how do we bridge the gap between a recognition that there's a need and actually translating that into usage. And then, of course, given the current situation, we couldn't go without a brief mention of why CRM is so important even in the current circumstances. And so one of the challenges for firms is that the landscape has changed so much in the last few years. I think it's fair to say that most firms started in the bottom left-hand corner of this quadrant, where the goal was really to try and get all of your contacts into one place, potentially to ensure data privacy compliance, GDPR compliance, but it was really about an operational efficiency gain when it came to trying to implement technology and systems. Interestingly, the converse, in the bottom right-hand corner, typically outside of professional services, the focus was much more on campaign automation. So implementing systems like HubSpot, Marketo, Pardot, Kentico, some of the names you may have heard about, where businesses were not kind of tethered by the need to constantly consult with stakeholders on the population of marketing lists. They were much more free to execute campaigns based on their own knowledge, on segmentation, and all the disciplines that are critical to being able to do client relationship management well. I think we as firms are now starting to respond to that and equally responding to business development pressures. And so we're trying now to focus on the top right-hand corner But traditionally, I think it's been in the top right more about pitches and RFPs. And I think firms need to think more broadly about what is an opportunity. In my mind, there are two dimensions. There's the formality of the process. So, as I said, formal pitches and RFPs are in that top, very formal stage. And the other dimension is how well identified is the opportunity. Have we actually identified a tangible piece of business, or is this a speculative business planning opportunity, for example? And in my mind, we have to do all of those things. So sales and business development is not just about that structured RFP, but it's also about fee quotes, presentations, business planning. And systems have really evolved to be able to support that. And then ultimately, in the top kind of left-hand corner, we're now focusing much more on experience and knowledge tracking. I'm working at a firm at the moment who describe their challenge as if only our firm knew what our firm knows. And what they really mean by that is, how do they harness and leverage the data that they have? There are new systems that are emerging in that top left-hand corner, such as Foundation or Intap, or other systems that offer that experience tracking capability. But it isn't just about technology, it's about how do we build out the workflow to make sure that we're gathering the right information at the right time, and how do we engage our professionals to provide us with that data. So a good example is, you can now come out of court, or you can come out of a client meeting, and you can digitally dictate into your phone what happened at that meeting. And by the time you get back to the office, it can actually be in the CRM system. And it's by demonstrating, I think, those sorts of results that enable us to really encourage behavior adoption. And Susie's going to talk a little bit more about that now, giving you a kind of a wider perspective on her views of CRM.
Thank you, Michael, and hello, everyone. Now, I know that there is a range of firms, which is a vast diaspora on the call today, and I by no means want to teach anyone to suck eggs. We're probably sat there wondering why on earth we've got a slide saying, what does CRM actually mean? Yes, I'm sure you know that. But sometimes I think the basics can be forgotten. So whether you have no CRM at all or a fully blown all bells and whistles one, it's important to remember what it actually stands for. And when I ask partners and other key stakeholders in the business, I get a surprising variety of answers to what does CRM actually mean. From those who've got nothing to those who've had a CRM embedded for years, they're still not sure of the terminology. Now, all you out there will know, no doubt, that it's customer relationship management. It was the term coined in the 1980s, and it is universally accepted. Except in professional services, where the word customer doesn't really resonate, certainly not with our key stakeholders. And that's why I found it, when you're wanting to get buy-in from senior management, even if you already have a CRM, is to really clarify the term of what it does, so there is no room for error. I've worked in places where they've only focused on a small part of it because they've not really understood it. So I go in and I talk towards, and I talk about CCRRM, because that's really what it is. So what is CCRRM? Well, as Jill mentioned earlier, and as Michael mentioned earlier, yes, client. That is the number one thing that people think it is, and they always say client relationship management system, replacing client for customer. It's an obvious thing. However, and I have worked on projects where people have focused solely on the client, but the fact is a client, unlike the customer, is already a embedded customer. What about everybody else? And that is really what this tool is for. So the other people, contacts, clearly extremely important. Whilst 80% of your clients will give you, 20% of your clients rather will give you 80% of your business, contacts can be a range of things. They might be people who work within an institutional client. They might be individuals you wanting to convert into a client. They might be people who are wrapped around clients but will never be clients themselves. Or they may indeed be that third important one, which is the referrer. The referrers are that holy grail, that intangible claim of the people that we're always wanting to have more and more data on. Why are they referring right to us? Are they happy existing clients? Are they people we want to get to know better. Are they competitors who are giving this work because they can't do it themselves? Are they people we're managing a strong relationship with? Getting some data on them in the system is just as important as the ones who are existing and current clients. And that brings us on to the relationship part, which is often a difficult one to explain, because if you have some strong rainmakers in the business, they have relationships everywhere. But the bit that is often missing from that relationship when you are in a relationship marketing game here in professional services is the active management, and being able to demonstrate that it has actually happened. You're actually managing that relationship and moving it forward. Now that is important. I have contacts at JP Morgan, and I know they have a phrase which is, if it didn't happen in the CRM, it didn't happen. If you can't tangibly prove that you're moving that relationship forward, then how do we know you have? How do we know it was down to you and not something else? So the management part is really important. Hence CRM. So now we've got the what about the why? Now some of you are here because you want to think about buying a new system, starting from scratch in a new place. When some of you are here with really established CRMs and you're wanting to make some changes, wherever you are, the first question you have to figure out is, where is your firm on the CRM maturity curve? And the maturity curve does not relate to size or budget or ability to spend lots of money on a CRM. It is entirely down to the appetite and ability of the people within that firm to grasp the need and value of having a CRM. And I've worked in huge global organizations with vast budgets that were farther back on the CRM maturity curve than some very small regional practices who really milk their CRM exceedingly well. And yes, it's sometimes easier, we know, to be in the speedboat than the tanker. Trying to change practices in large organizations is harder, but still really need to know where you are on that maturity curve. If you are the BD or marketing director, you will know where you are. If you've just joined, you'll be busy finding it out. But for those of you in the rest of the team, it's kind of beholden on you to go and find out, what is the appetite, where are the pockets and that you can work with, where are you on that journey. And the next thing is to be able to answer the question, what is the burning question that your firm is trying to answer? Now there is no one size fits all here. It's entirely unique to the firm that you are in as to what that burning question is. And it can be a burning platform question, or it can be a holy grail of where people would like to get to. But there will always be one, possibly two standout questions if you ask the partnership what they want answered by a CRM. Not even by CRM, just what they want answered. Then you can also map, what are the other questions that came out during that? What's the next step of the journey? You know, we as marketers know what all the questions are and what all the answers are that CRM can provide. But for the professional, it's about what is the real bugbear that can be solved. And once you've grasped that and built your system to answer that first, then you have them with you on the journey to answer the other questions and let them know that timescale, because their question might not be the first one that the majority go with. So they need to have some knowledge of where it's going to be on that roadmap. And you also have to remember that many professionals and even marketing people sometimes think that CRM is the destination. You've bought it, we're done, everything's fixed. We know that that is not the case. An in-house person spends a lot of time to over-promise and under-deliver, trying to fight those fires. So lead with that engagement and understanding that this is a marathon and not a sprint. And you as an in-house person may not be the person that carries the torch for the whole journey. You may just be a part of a segment. I mean, I worked at a firm once where it took me 4 years to get the appetite to CRM over the line, and I was exhausted. And someone else had to take on the mantle of the implementation. You need to know what part of the journey you're on, so you can explain that to your stakeholders as you go along.
To illustrate that there isn't really any right or wrong answer when it comes to what you want your CRM system to do. And I think what this slide is trying to illustrate is that, as I said before, the focus initially was trying to get contacts onto a list to send out alerts and to run mailings. So the focus was very much on the left-hand side of this timeline. But as more and more firms have started to evaluate their pipeline, both from an informal and a formal sales process, and have included speculative business planning as well, there's been more and more of a focus on business development. And of course, that's led us to start needing to think about pricing. So working with, some firms have pricing committees, some have less formal processes for how they price up matters or projects, whether they're fixed price, time and materials. But CRM needs to be able to incorporate that kind of intelligence in terms of the work that you've done before and what was profitable for you. So CRM is now moving across this timeline to incorporate pricing as well. And then obviously one key thing that has really changed for businesses in the last few years is a recognition that client onboarding should not be an administrative process. It really needs to it's the beginning of the client journey. I recently was working with a firm where their new head of business development had come from banking. And whilst all of us have got different experience with how good our client relationships have been with our banks, one thing that banks are really good at is understanding the process for onboarding clients. And this particular bank had this concept of 999, which was after 9 days, the account needed to be set up. After 9 weeks, the client had to be fully operational with everything transferred and no glitches. And after 9 months, if they weren't happy, they would start looking for another bank. So they had really understood those milestones that that happen during that client onboarding process. And I think it's fair to say that most professional services firms still think about that as an administrative process, anti-money laundering, conflict checking, getting documents out to clients. They don't think about it as an opportunity to reinforce the buying decision as to why that client chose you in the first place. So I think CRM has a really important role to play in understanding what it is the client is ultimately trying to get out of this relationship, why they chose you in the first place. Yes, of course, you have to get them onboarded, but it's much more about the client experience. And while we're on the subject of that client experience, matter creation is seen as being something that lives within finance. And most of the time and billing systems that we operate as firms don't really add anything to the client experience. And it's all about getting the bill out, recording the time. Whereas actually there's some incredible value in those systems to understand the kind of work that you're doing and thinking about the milestones in the life of a matter. At the moment, what most firms tend to do is they think about the milestones in their world. So closing a matter is the logical time to then gather some more information from a client or ask them for feedback. Whereas often that's actually too late to do anything about any service delivery issues. So the whole purpose of this slide is it's really trying to illustrate that over time, and with the interconnectivity that needs to exist between systems, there's a real need to think about the flow of information across your organization and to gather the right information at the right time. So an example, everybody loves directory submissions, right? Of course not. We hate them. It's one of the least engaging things that we have to do in our businesses. But wouldn't it be better to capture the information during business as usual, rather than the way we do it at the moment, which is kind of a huge rush as deadlines are looming to get those directories submitted. And the systems that are available now build that workflow in. So as we pass certain milestones in the process, we're able to add information rather than trying to do it all in one go. Susie talked about referrals earlier on. A lot of firms try and capture the source of business during the client intake process. And that's not necessarily wrong, but if you think about the client intake process, by the time you've won the work, people really want to set up the job so they can start recording their time. So asking them lots and lots of questions in order for them to get past that gate and get to the next stage may not be the right thing to do. So perhaps thinking about building in the capture of that information during the opportunity stage might make more sense, so that you're actually capturing where did that work come from, what was the reason for them choosing us as a firm, that might make more sense to you than, for example, trying to capture all this information in one go. And I touched on client feedback a second ago. What we've learned from our client feedback process is that, yes, we need to ask people how a particular piece of work went, but we should be gathering that information and that feedback all the way through, and not just looking at kind of the headline response in terms of the satisfaction with the work that we've done, but looking at some detailed comments and understanding how we could be improving. We've recently started a process, or about a year now, of using net promoter scores to help us to understand what people think. And that's great to have an absolute number that helps you to understand how you compare and the value that you're giving. But by looking at the individual comments that people are also making, one of the lessons that we've learned is that people will give us a good score because of the long-standing relationship that we have, but they might say some constructively critical things in their free text comments, and it actually is more important for us to look at those than it is necessary to look at the overall score. So really what I'm trying to do is with this slide is to help you to kind of focus on the business process and how data flows across your firm, rather than looking at individual siloed systems. And in my view, that CRM can't succeed in a silo. And it needs to be the rules of CRM apply at every single one of these touch points. So what's going on in the marketplace? One of the things that we have the opportunity, as Jill said at the beginning of this presentation, to do is to understand kind of what's going on, not just at individual firms, but across firms. And we've tried to summarize these in the following kind of 6 market trends. The first one is business development. I think in the current market conditions, being able to know what you know and being able to leverage that is only going to be more important. One of the challenges with taking an exclusively kind of marketing focus to CRM is that many systems create or perpetuate the need to create marketing lists. The problem with that is when something like COVID-19 happens, or any other kind of crisis, you need to be able to pivot and be flexible and agile in order to get communications out. And if you've got an entirely list-based focus, it's very difficult for you to be able to to segment your data in order to respond to something that perhaps you hadn't, created tags for or lists for. And to the point about being able to get data out, that kind of leads me to the second trend, which is about analytics. So much of the focus of CRM in the past has been about how do we get data into the system, as opposed to how do we get data out. One of the things that I talked about just a second ago was around our use of net promoter scores and analyzing the free text. One of the things that we've done is we've actually created a dashboard that shows us our net promoter score with what we call our sentiment score. And the sentiment is using kind of keyword searching and AI to find either positive or negative sentiments within the free text. So I can look at a client and I can see, or a sector, and I can see what's my net promoter score in that sector versus the sentiment score, because what I'm looking for is a gap between those two, because that then tells me that I've got some work to do with those particular clients. So the point I'm making about analytics is, don't just dump a whole load of data on people, but try and give them some information which tells them the one thing that they have to do today, rather than trying to work it out for themselves. Because that then drives me to my third trend, which is adoption. We've, I think, confused the need to make professionals' lives easier with not bothering them at all. And in my experience, we cannot succeed with client relationship management without those people who have the client relationships investing time in the system. So what we need to do is deliver actionable outputs, but we also need to look at other data sources that we could use. And this is where technology can really help us to pull in unstructured content and make it more structured. So for example, time recording narrative, expense systems, for law firms when you're submitting papers to court, most of those are online now. Are there data sources that we can use that will help us to populate the system with valuable content to reduce the burden on our professionals? On my previous slide, I talked about alignment of business process. And I think that's something that we're starting to see now, a recognition that information management has to be firm-wide. So a lot of firms are now implementing master data strategies where they have a golden source of truth. So which system contributes that particular piece of information, and how do we leverage that effectively? And why are we doing that? Well, that's because clients are better informed than we are, and they're also more demanding. When we come out of this, we're going to be required, I think, to deliver the same or better levels of service to our clients for a more competitive price. So using technology to share the data that we already have is going to be absolutely critical. So the only way that we can do that is by closing the loop, and every single point of the client journey becomes relevant. So one of the challenges that we really have is, how do we bridge this gap? A recent survey demonstrated that lots of firms, 2/3 of them, were, prior to COVID-19, fully expecting to invest heavily in marketing and business development technology. So vendors responded to that with all of the acquisitions and mergers and changes that we saw taking place in 2019. But why is that? Increased competition. Even before the current situation, differentiating yourself from your competitors became increasingly challenging. Rapid changes in technology, not just in terms of CRM, but in things like artificial intelligence, business intelligence, those sorts of things. At Wilson, we kind of think about a virtuous circle between those things. So AI plus BI equals CI. So artificial intelligence plus business intelligence ultimately equals client intelligence. And although most firms have invested in Power BI capabilities, they haven't yet really worked out how to deliver reports or answer questions that speak to that. What's the one key thing that I as a professional need to do today? Because there are changing expectations within our user base. They want to be a little bit more self-serve. They want to start digging around in the data. I'm not saying we're going to make them all power users of CRM, but certainly giving them the ability to quickly and easily access a summary of information about what's going on is really important. And I think as a result of that, firms are starting to recognize the importance of their own data. But, you know, Houston, we have a problem. We've got people who are planning to invest and have invested, but we still have a usage gap. So as this slide is showing you, there's a significantly smaller percentage of professionals who are actually using CRM technology. And I think part of that, you know, is always down to, people will say in an interview with someone like me, you know, what is it you want the system to do for you? They'll say one thing, but then obviously do something completely different. But I don't think it's entirely down to that. Let's be honest, you know, we have set the bar pretty low in terms of the functionality that we've delivered to people. It has been very marketing and business development focused. Most of the systems out there, the reporting has either been entirely inadequate or completely non-existent. So it's very difficult to engage people if they have to put so much work into getting anything out. I think training and communication has been one size fits all. And we haven't used all of the tools at our disposal to make the delivery mechanism for training and communication engaging. So using storyboards, podcasts, all the things that we know engage users, we kind of ignore that and then kind of do classroom-based presentations and expect people to kind of take all the information away and work out what they're going to do with it. And talking about information, the data quality has generally been pretty poor. So, you know, addressing those things by breaking down some of the silos between systems so that information can only needs to be entered once, and identifying that golden source of truth is critical, because the key thing is that CRM cannot succeed in a vacuum. One of the other challenges I've had, dare I say it, is that other department heads were not necessarily as engaged in the success of CRM as maybe they should be. You know, it's been very much it's a marketing initiative. I heard through the grapevine recently of a firm who were planning to furlough some of its staff, and the finance director on a conference call with the other department heads said that, of course, he wasn't going to be furloughing any of his staff because they were the important ones that sent out invoices. The good news is that the head of marketing and business development, you know, spoke up boldly and said that, of course, his team wouldn't have any invoices to send out if it wasn't for what her team did. And I think that's the key, is that marketing and business development are starting to get a kind of a seat at the table when it comes to the importance of technology to support what they do, but that hasn't always been the case. So as Susie is going to explain, it's really about engaging the professionals and trying to put yourself in their shoes, because I think you'll be surprised what they're looking for is probably not as complex as you think.
Thank you, Michael. So that's very interesting to hear about what the different things are going on in the market right now, but I want to talk now about what the professional actually thinks. What do they think they need? Now, all of those of us who've been working alongside lawyers, accountants, surveyors, professional services for a long time understand there is one key question. Yes, we're back to questions that we always have to answer, which is, what's in it for them? The motivation of the professional is key to get buy-in for any system, and it has to answer their own personal. So not only have you got to answer the burning question of the entire organisation, but once you're getting into the granular detail, it's what's in it for them individually. And this obviously differs hugely between corporate lawyers, high net worth accountants, private wealth, lawyers or accountants, in fact. So there's different motivations. You've got to find what it is that's bugging them about the information. Is it incorrect data? Is it simplicity of entry? And you need to get that engagement at all levels. So you need to ensure the whole firm recognises the need. You need buy-in from the top. And from an in-house perspective, you need to get that board approval, that management committee, and you need to find your ambassadors. If you don't have buy-in from the top, it's literally very little point continuing. But you also need that buy-in from the sector heads, the practice area heads, and key leaders within the firm who may not have an official title, but are the go-to people that people listen to. You need them on your side to really make them understand the fundamentals of it. Now, for some, it's going to come down to, because they're owners, these key stakeholders, they want to know what the cost benefit is. And in some ways, you're lucky, because in professional services, time is money. And it's a very clear equation. I managed to get a CRM over the line in one firm once, simply by taking it down to the brass tacks of, you are hemorrhaging £1.2 million a year by not having an automated system, something which is going to cost you peanuts compared to that. So that number was very, very bold and very strong for them to get behind. Other people are not motivated entirely by that. They want to see the brand recognition, they want to see how the reputational impact of it is, and all the tools that go around it. They know that the cost isn't just the CRM they'll be built on things, so that's got to be clearly defined. I spoke to a property partner the other week, and he was extolling the virtues of how finally they can segment properly different sector and different people within the organisation, and that to him had been a game changer. But the big thing for you to understand is, where are you in the wider plan? Where are you in the bigger project plan? There's always going to be a new finance system, a new HR system, document management system, practice management system, upgrade of IT, moving of offices. There'll always be other projects on the go. So build your advocates, as Michael said earlier, within the other business services directors, and find out how you can build those allies with HR, IT, finance, and see how CRM might dovetail nicely and in fact support their own ambitions to make sure that you get it over the line. So once you've got it over the line, what is going to be your proof of value? I remember a partner once saying to me, well, a well-built and accurately populated CRM should provide, all the information you need to prove its value. Well, yes, in theory, it will. For those of you who are on this call because your CRM is no longer fit for purpose, you'll know that that's not always the case. It comes down, as Michael's already mentioned, to two basic things: getting accurate information into the system and extracting meaningful data out of it. And whether you're using AI or IntraHive or other systems to pull that data in, if it's talking directly to your finance system, to your expenses system, whatever it is, your onboarding system, that information all comes together to make it as accurate and have that one source of truth if you can. And if you can make your one source of truth the CRM and know what information wins when people start putting extras, it's very important. The next part is that meaningful data out. and as Michael's already discussed, talking about reporting. Don't try and justify your existence as an in-house person by over-reporting. Long-winded reports to justify your position does not impress. Find those key things, and there shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all for a CRM, and there isn't a one-size-fits-all for reports. Find the report that they want. You now have the tool to extrapolate those reports meaningfully and very targeted to the internal audience to make that data work for you. Now, we're going to go on to talk about COVID and crisis later, but any CRM will be tested during crisis because that's the crunch point, the point where you need to be talking to people and you need to be getting access to that information quickly, and it will instantly expose those weak points in the data flow, which in some ways can be your friend because it's now the time to really get that impetus to fix them, find out where the gaps are in the data and use that crisis as mercenary, but use that to make sure you plug those gaps for when you need it again.
But taking on board all the things that we've talked about so far, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that in CRM, we still have a mountain to climb. And I think part of that is, is down to kind of what I call the 3 C's of system adoption. And that's that people typically only use systems either if, one, they affect their compensation, so they'll earn more money or they'll get paid if they do. So expense recording, time recording, they will get some form of reward if they actually use the system. Or it's compulsory, so they have no choice but to use the system in order to do their jobs. The third one is that they are sufficiently compelling for them to want to use the system. And I think that's really where CRM has to focus. Is we're not yet in a position where it's compulsory, although interestingly I've seen particularly in other firms in other sectors like accounting and construction, where there is much more of a discipline around putting information into the system. We still, I think, most professional services sectors have to focus on making it compelling using some of the things that we've talked about. So what are the golden rules of how we do that? Well, I think the first one is you have to not try and do too much. There is a temptation, particularly if you have vendors kind of selling to you the whole time, of getting really excited about all the different things that you could do in the system. So business planning, pipeline management, marketing list management, and all of those things are valid, and different firms will be at different stages of each of them. But the number one rule for me is don't try and do too much. Because the second rule is really to succeed, you have to do what you've decided to do as well as you possibly can. So that means that your data has to be 100% accurate, relevant, and complete. And I know that's incredibly challenging, but it's true. Is that we live in a world with where phones haven't helped giving us a lack of attention to detail and lack of time that we pay attention to things, and therefore we lose people really quickly if we don't give them relevant and useful and accurate information. The third rule is automation and integration. So making sure that we're able to collect data or leverage data that's already been collected as a byproduct of some other process, and how do we then use technology to bring that data to our world. And I think that's something that firms have done, I think, pretty well, actually. Certainly in the UK, I think, integrating CRM systems with time and billing or expense management is fairly common practice. But I think, how do you then pull all of that data together and deliver it out to professionals in a way that is engaging and relevant to them? And I think the answer to that question is that you have to personalize it to them. Think about a typical law firm. A corporate lawyer is, about as different an animal to a private client lawyer as you could possibly get. And yet we try and train them to use our system, pressing the same buttons and expect them in some way to engage with that. And of course, that is just not going to happen. I mean, in the industry that I work in, where you'd have thought that this is what we would all want to do, even I have challenges now to get my team to use the CRM system without making it as easy as possible, providing with accurate data. And I said earlier on, helping them to know what they already know. But actually, the number one thing that you need a CRM system to do is tell them something they didn't already know. Because if you manage to do that just once, then you'll get people coming back. And I think one of the things I see accounting firms do pretty well, actually, where there is that discipline around using the pipeline, or where private equity firms, I think, do really well, because they typically have the Monday morning meeting, is work out, is there a process that happens that you can leverage and use your system to provide content to that? So, for example, go to practice group meetings. You know, Susie, when she was talking about some of the process or what's in it for them, you may not have caught all of this earlier on, was talking about the annual report that lawyers often have to produce around what they did this year and what was the contribution that they gave to the firm, or as I kind of call it, the I love me memo. And a lot of people have to do that now, or actually moving towards creating more weighted scorecards or business plans. So finding something that you can use your CRM system to provide content to, making that process easier for them, is critical, and working out how your system can support that is kind of another kind of golden rule for success.
So, moving on to Michael and I talking about the current situation. CRM, unfortunately, can stand also for crisis relationship management. And as we're all aware, this isn't the first crisis that we've been through, and it surely won't be the last. And we have some lessons from history. I know, Michael, you have some anecdotes from the Enron days.
Yeah, and actually, a question just came in just a second ago about, you know, does it make a difference how a project is labelled? For example, looking at calling it client lifecycle management rather than CRM, and I think actually that speaks quite nicely to this particular point, which is, in a past life, Arthur Andersen was one of my biggest clients, and we were trying to persuade them that they wanted to implement a CRM system. Which they were determined that they weren't going to do. And then Enron hit, and they needed to be able to get out communications to their clients on a daily basis. And in those days, it was snail mail, so it was stuffing envelopes rather than sending out emails, although we did just about have the capability to do emails. I remember the first list that came through of 100 of their top clients, and 67 of the email addresses, it said in the email address field, I do not know this person's email address. And I think, you always look back on those sorts of moments and wish that you had, the benefit of foresight to have created your system and the data that you needed. And I think, however you label it or however you tackle it, the need to be able to respond to, events outside of your control is critical. And having a repository of information that is flexibly segmented to enable you to do that is critical.
Absolutely. And I mean, I put slightly tongue-in-cheek that a crisis being GDPR, but I think all of us who went through the GDPR, hiatus of a few years ago, that it was a crisis as people scrabbled to discover who they knew, and these lists, and interesting to your point earlier around if you're list-based, which many organizations still are, how do you know which person on which list you want to send to? You can't just send out the same communication to the people you invited to an event last summer, and GDPR did shine a very harsh spotlight on how people were processing their data, and justifiably so. But I mean, I've been in firms where, there's been a fire, and it doesn't need to be a global crisis. It can be a crisis just for you, where you find you are bumped out of your building, and unless you have, the correct IT backup and warm sites and etc., the thing you have to have is a fully operating set of data around your clients, so you can segment them and be able to go out to them. And in this particular one with COVID, the retail industry, the hospitality industry suffering. I was talking to a property partner last week, who was saying, if we hadn't had this new CRM system, I wouldn't have been able to contact just the relevant retail and hospitality clients, because I was still relying on the party lists from before. So it's really proved its value under pressure, which has changed the attitudes hugely there. Also comes on to there's been a lot of talk around what people are being sent now under the guise of being crisis communications. You know, what is it that your clients and your contacts are looking for? Yes, reassurance, empathy, information, but timely and relevant. And, you know, there's a lot of thought leadership fatigue in that. Is direct marketing or you know, reaching out to your clients really thought leadership? Is it just actually what it is? It's direct marketing to make sure they know that you're there. And also looking at the situation now to use it as a time to update the data, because we're living in a vastly changing world, and if people are stuck at home, utilize that time to potentially go and get your data in a great shape, because you've got people who've got the time to do it.
Okay, so one of the first ones, we've got an old CRM system but no budget for a new one. Is there anything we can do to help it make it work better for us?
I mean, I would certainly say, depending on what you have, focusing on data quality and the ability to get data out. So you might not be able to do much about getting data in due to the user interface or the technology, but assuming that it was invented at some point in the 21st century, then it should be possible to be able to get information out. And I found that actually providing, you know, a simple report, not trying to do too much with that report, as long as it's got good quality data on it, is a good way of reinvigorating CRM. If they're assuming that budget constraints apply, that you can't invest in an add-on system to do things like signature scraping and contact curation, that's probably a slightly higher ticket way of improving what you have at the moment without having to completely reinvest in the CRM system. But I certainly think it's about, however you do it, it's about data quality and reporting to get people engaged with the content that you have in the system.
Okay, thank you, Michael. So another one for you, Michael, because we can hear you the best. We have a system, but it's not being used and the quality of the data is poor and unreliable. So what do the panel recommend for relaunching an existing system?
I would first of all try and work out what's the kind of most critical initiative that's going on at the firm at the moment. So are people talking about key clients? Are they talking about implementing a referrer or intermediary program? Whatever is the buzz that's going on at the firm at the moment, and this is kind of what Susie was trying to talk about during the CRM part of the presentation, is work out what those conversations are, because you're more likely to get engagement from people if you go along to explain to them how what you have can support what they're trying to do. I think if you go along with a big let's be good citizens approach and use the CRM, I think you're going to struggle. I think given the current circumstances, I was on a call with the managing partner of a firm last night, and he was saying, I get the operational efficiencies and wanting to have a new system to achieve that, don't get me wrong, but what are the results going to be? What work am I going to get as a result of this? So I think that's the other thing, is that you've got to, operational efficiencies will come more quickly, but you've got to think about how am I going to help people make that sale? And again, that I think means you can't try and do it for everyone all at once. You've got to be focused and pilot it with a small group who are, like client teams, for example, who have a remit to achieve a particular target within the firm.
Okay, I've got, what are good CRM systems for an SME firm?
I'd say probably you'd be looking at cloud-based because functionally most of the systems are pretty equal, but you'd be wanting to look at something that, although you'd be paying an annual fee, if you're a smaller firm, the offset to that is not having to have large amounts of infrastructure costs that you'd have to have if you bought an on-premise system. So obviously Salesforce springs to mind. That's potentially might be overkill for you, so I might look at something like Sugar. I know a number of firms who are using that. Workbooks, Zoho. So there are a number of systems in that kind of space. Try not to necessarily get something that's too salesy. I think that's one of the challenges that you might have depending on the culture of your firm. But there are quite a few in that space now that are offering kind of nice SME, relatively cost-effective technology.
Okay.
Also, Peppermint being a very good one for an SME firm as well.
Thank you. just very briefly, what do you find to be the most effective training techniques for CRM systems?
One-to-one.
If you can, and you know, embedding, also looking at, I found in one place where we rolled out CRM is looking at who, you know, who actually is going to be maintaining it. And we had begun structuring it around teams and partners and, you know, how they work together, but actually it was the secretaries that we then got to lead on it, and we grouped them around the hub, which was the secretary looked after a certain group, and rolled out the training, trained the secretary first, then the secretary trained everybody else with us, and then followed it on with floor walking and having that one-to-one, and a lot of gamification where it was prizes, you know, turning up at people's desks and getting them to run functions and see what they turned up, and no one knew when you were coming. Well, very well.
And don't beat yourself up or get too upset about it. I mean, there are, you know, everyone is different. Not everybody is a rainmaker. Not everybody is a business developer. And there's only so much you can do to persuade people that they want to do it. But keeping it easy and personalizing it, you know, to them will certainly help you.
Yeah, I think what you said, Michael, which is showing people how it works and what it can actually deliver, you know, taking it to the team meetings or the Monday meeting, I think is helping people to do that is really key. And
yeah, I mean, I run all my meetings with my, you know, the people who are responsible in my business for CRM sales. We do it on the system. We don't do it via any other means. That's where it is, and that's made us use it. Do they all love it? Probably not, but that's what we do.
Very, very quickly, just one quick question before we wrap up then. What do the panel think is the key functionality a CRM can bring to the table to push it over the line?
Well, as I said earlier, I think it's very much dependent on that individual firm. So it's finding that burning platform to be able to take it forward. And no one size fits all. Would you agree, Michael?
Yeah, I would. I mean, if I had to pick of all the things that professionals tell me, I think it does have to come down to who knows who and what's going on. I think that is the most important thing. If people hate feeling unprepared. So going into a meeting and not knowing that a meeting took place last week, or not knowing that there was a relationship that you could have leveraged to, you know, to help you, is deeply frustrating. So I think if I had to pick one thing, I think it would be who knows who and what's going on. Well, that secretly was two things, but anyway.